Welcome to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with host Lane Nordland.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cattleman's Call podcast. Lane Nordland with you here today, and our focus in our conversation is going to be predators and policy. So we're going to talk about the Endangered Species Act and efforts out in Washington, D.C. to update it to today's world. And we're going to have a focus on gray wolves as well as part of this conversation. So our guests today are going to be California cattle producer and California Cattlemen's Association President Rick Roberti and Kaitlynn Glover with the National Public Lands Council and Executive Director of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, joining us from Washington, D.C. And there, of course, has been a lot of controversy surrounding gray wolf protections. I'm from Montana, a little bit different scenario than what producers like Rick are facing with gray wolves because protections are still in place. But before we dive into that discussion around wolves, Rick, what's the weather like in California? What part of the state are you calling in from here today?
Well, our property is in northeastern California. We're kind of high desert. We're only 40 miles west of Reno, Nevada. Today it's raining. It's a good sign. Most of us depend on some early rains to start feed in California, where most of the cattle from our area is shipped to winter pasture between middle of November to the end of December. So it's a good sign. Things are green and very optimistic right now for the weather.
Well, that's great to hear too. I mean, it was quite the weather here this summer for so many producers across the West and the Northern Plains. We've talked about it on past shows. We weren't even supposed to have moisture this spring. Matt Makins, the meteorologist, he joined us a few weeks ago, and he got to talk about why his forecast was wrong. And he attributed a lot of the Canadian wildfire smoke cooled down the northern hemisphere and brought a lot of good rain down to us in Montana. And again, it's always good to get a good fall start with moisture in the ground. How many inches do you guys usually get up there in the northeastern part of California?
Yeah, in our valley, it all depends. Maybe 11 on one side and 23 to 4 on the other side. So it's about in less than 20 miles. It's a big difference.
Well, good to hear some moisture coming in, and that is quite the difference there, depending on what ridge you're on.
Yep.
So, what kind of cattle? What does your operation look like there? What do you look? What kind of cattle are you raising?
We're mostly a cow calf. Run about 500 mama cows, and it's a family operation. I have two brothers who work. The only other thing we can grow here is alfalfa, and so they do most of the farming. We all work together, families, and live on the same ranch. So it truly is a unique situation. But right now, the farmers aren't real happy, but the cattle side of the business is enjoying them not talking to us whenever we load the truck up with some hay to go feed.
Well, again, Rick, thanks for joining us and giving us a quick description of the family operation there. And I know we're going to be talking about a very sensitive issue for so many producers across your state in the West. And Kaitlynn, how are things out in Washington, D.C.? When we're recording this conversation, the government shutdown is still well underway, but the work never stops for PLC and NCBA. How are things going today in D.C.?
You know, you're right. We are now today in day 36 of the government shutdown. It's the longest government shutdown that we have seen in American history. And I think one of the things that is underscored for a lot of these federal land producers and producers who experience depredation from federally protected species is their nexus to the federal government. I think ranchers in the West, producers who have a more interface with endangered species, more interface with public lands, they deal and think about what the federal government is doing far more than the vast majority of Americans. And so where I sit in Washington, it is really important that these agencies are able to be operational, that they are able to be functional for producers all across the country, but certainly for those with whom they have this really close relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I'm looking forward to our conversation today because so many folks are asking why we can't get the ESA reformed, and it's a conversation that are held at our state PLC meetings, at our state cattle and stock grower association meetings. So I hope this is a good conversation for folks going into these fall and winter meetings and can really learn something from here today. And Rick, from a personal experience, can you share how predator management, especially gray wolves up in the northern part of California, have affected your operation?
This is California, and it is a totally different animal than most of the other parts of the country. Basically, there is no real good management plan. The management plan that's in effect right now is really in California to make sure that the wolves pretty much take the whole state. And I know a lot of people think that's strange, but we've got them halfway down the state right now. They're doing nothing to help ranchers. Most all the management is to protect the wolf and make sure it thrives. So the management plan we have is working well for the wolves, but it's certainly not working for those of us in the livestock industry. We're in a valley, and it's about 120,000 acres of both high desert and also wetlands. It's real cattle country. It's cold country. We're at 5,000 feet. And what we've experienced is new to us, but not new to a lot of people in the north, in Northern California. They came in here about 11, 12 years ago, but a lot of them have been experienced wolves long before we have. So we do try to invent the wheel several different times. But right now we have a real imbalance in our state because of regulations that have protected the mountain lion and the bear. We have very little deer herd left. So the wolves have to live on livestock, and that's what they've been doing. It's affected us in ways like we haven't been going to our permit in the mountains because we just can't take the chance of losing 10 to 15% of our calves like some of the people who are coming out right now are experiencing. So we need some changes to be done really fast, and it's really hurt my neighbors and friends in more ways than just financial. This is a mental problem that's going on. We've hung together. We've grown closer together, I think, because of this, and knew we had to try and get what is wrong to be righted. But in a few weeks, most of the cattle are going to be leaving the Sierra Valley and go to summer pasture in California. That's going to leave the few that are left to deal with all these wolves that we have around us. And even our local communities are scared because wolves are going to be going into those communities because of dogs and cats and maybe 4-H projects and others. So it's a scary time for us as we head into winter.
Now, it's not just the depredation in terms of cattle being killed by wolves too. There is quite a response that cattle that have been exposed to wolves or been run around by wolves or hear the wolves howling, cortisol levels spike, loss of just the stress that also comes with wolves just being near cattle that have been exposed to wolves. Talk about that response that cattle have, not just the death loss, but also the stress levels on cattle that have been exposed to wolves.
Yeah, not just people, but our cattle. We don't know. We're fortunate to have some help. We have 2 different groups that have been helping us and doing tests, putting up cameras, doing some hair tests for cortisol, and it's amazing what they've been finding out. We have collared some cattle to see their stress, but most of our information has been picked up by cameras out in the national forest mostly. But that we can't seem to get to that point in our state where we can really talk about that. We're having a hard time getting paid for kills that have been identified by the government as real kills. Still, nobody has received, that I know of, received any money for 2025. We know pay for presence is something that is costing us a lot more money, but initially it's hard enough to just get paid for the ones that we know have been killed by a wolf. So that's coming. It's going to be a tough task, but it has to happen.
So are those payments, is that set up through the state or is that a federal program? Because I'm familiar with what's going on in Montana and Colorado more closely when it comes to predator and especially wolf depredation. Is this a state fund? And I guess why are there such difficulties even when there seems to be a confirmed case? You're not getting paid.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and it is money appropriated by the state. We've got a good chunk of change, but the money is distributed through the California Department of Wildlife, and they're shorthanded. And they say, well, the government payments, if you've ever worked with the government, a job, you know that it's going to be 6 months down the road. So hopefully it'll come, but it's not helping to those who could have sold yearlings this spring and already had that check in the bank, and we're still waiting for money on those 800 pounders. So
Yep.
uh,
Very frustrating all the way around. Yep. And so, Kaitlynn, we know this is a problem. We're working to address this problem program. Geez, if I could talk here today. But Kaitlynn, what are some of the core reforms that NCBA is focused on in advocating for updating, refreshing the Endangered Species Act here in 2025 and moving into 2026?
Well, Lane, as you can imagine, this is sort of a multi-pronged problem, right? I think Rick laid it out really well that, we have a federal mandate around the protection and management of this species. We have a state funding program to be able to provide some compensation for depredation. We have a state who ordinarily would have primacy over wildlife management, but for the species was protected by the feds. And then you also have federal depredation verification standards and some other federal monies that can feed into these programs. And in fact, a lot of these programs are sort of born out of the inefficiency of the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act was intended to be a sort of an acute treatment mechanism, right? When it was passed, it was supposed to identify a problem, create some barriers around that species to be able to say, we know that there's a population problem. We can identify the best scientific fix. We have a plan to implement that program or those fixes. And then we have a mechanism to delist that species and then monitor it for a while to make sure that a change in management status, back to state authority isn't detrimental. The problem is that, over the last 50 years, what we've seen are deficiencies in each step of that process. And so there's this larger call for ESA reform or modernization generally, but we also have these species-specific sort of one-offs that we have to do because reforming the Endangered Species Act has been so controversial and so emotional. When we're talking about reform of this, what I think is arguably a really foundational landmark act, this statute, we're talking about improvements in the listing process, right? Giving the agency the tools to be able to make a timely decision that when somebody raises a red flag and says, hey, I think that there's a problem here, they can get through that assessment phase in a timely manner so that their lack of decision or that their inability to make a timely decision isn't fodder for litigation. There's a whole petition reform process that we think would fix a lot of those issues and would stop the agency from spending money on litigation. And that's money that they could be spending on assessments and actual recovery. We also see opportunities for reform in the planning part itself, right? A number of species have, of the thousands that are listed, a significant portion of them do not have recovery plans. So what that means is that the Fish and Wildlife Service has made a determination that, yes, they qualify for a place on the list, but we don't have a plan for how to fix what to do with them. And so if a species is going to be on the list, we think that logically a recovery plan that can be implemented and can be done so without incredible adverse effect to the surrounding environment, including the human environment, is really important. And then I think the big piece where we have seen so much focus, especially in the wolf, but certainly in the grizzly bear and in the prairie dog, black-footed ferret, the yellow-billed cuckoo, and so many others, is this durability of an agency decision when they decide to downlist or delist, right? We want to celebrate what the success under this sort of acute treatment mechanism, right? We want to be able to say, look, we identified a problem, we fixed the problem, and now we're going to move on to a different problem. And that's really what we've seen with the case of the wolf, right? We've seen scientific evidence for, several decades now that the wolf is recovered across the lower 48. We have seen political agreement. We have seen policy agreement, statutory agreement. But where we have seen the biggest challenges are in the courts. There's always some process deficiency or difference of opinion that a court has been able to find in various delisting measures that has created some durability problems in the case of the wolf. When we're thinking about reforming or really bringing the Endangered Species Act to its full strength or its true potential, you have to have durability in that listing decision so that when you say, look, enough is enough, we've met our goals, that the agency is trusted to make that determination that something comes off the list, not just their determination that something comes on the list. All of those things are included in one of the bills that we support, the ESA Modernization Act, and we've really seen some good traction in the House of Representatives on that. We certainly would like to implement and get all of those things enacted into law, because much like Rick and everybody across Washington and Wisconsin, Wyoming, Colorado, all the rest, we really would like to return to a management that is not single species management. We don't want to have to do single species bills. We don't want to have to plan around one endangered species, but that's where a lack of reformed ESA, a stagnated ESA, has put us over time.
So, Rick, when you listen to the complexities of this and know that it's a battle in the courtroom for so many of these technicalities that they're trying to find in keeping species listed, from your firsthand experience and from your neighbors and the people you serve there in California, how do you think delisting would change things for your operation? I'm also thinking California also has its own set of wildlife protection laws. The mountain lion comes to mind as well. But how do you think a federal delisting of the gray wolf would change things or complicate things? What's your take on that?
Well, a federal delisting is going to help, because right now California is using that to say even if it was delisted in California, it's still on the federal delisting. They've kind of been using that against us for some time. So you're right. I don't think California's maybe will ever delist the wolf. We hope we get some structure to where we can help ourselves, but we're a different kind of state, and that's where the power is. That's where the money is, and nobody's going to buck that system yet. So it's going to be a while. I was encouraged when I was in Washington, D.C. About a month or half ago or so. I was really encouraged because last year when I was there, it was really a down atmosphere. Everyone we met was very sour. They knew things were maybe going to even get worse. With the change of the administration, people met us. They were on time. They met with us, not just an aide. There was a different mood in Washington, D.C. that brought me home a little hopeful. NCBA did all they can do, and I know they're doing all they can do. And they've been there every time I've needed something. They are. But I came back from Washington knowing that we don't have the votes to change that yet, and we have a really small window to get something done. So we got to push really hard for the next 12 months, or else I don't know when that can happen federally. But I just say that the Interior Department and the staff of the NCBA are working really hard, and I appreciate it. Just the respect they've given us when we went back there.
And Kaitlynn, jumping back to you, obviously there is a short window with the current makeup of Congress to try and make a push during this congressional session. But could you just share a little bit of the background? I understand it, but our listeners may not, on why wolves are delisted and are managed on the state level in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. How did that come about?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm probably going to need to go back a little bit further, Lane, because it's incredible. When you think about passage of the Endangered Species Act, that happened in 1973. The first time a wolf was listed on the Endangered Species Act was in 1974. So over the last, more than 50 years, we have had regular changes in status for wolves in the Northern Rocky Mountain distinct population, DPS. They're the ones that you're talking about in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. We've had distinct populations established, de-established, listed, and delisted in the Great Lakes region. We've had other spread to the Pacific Northwest. Now we see them in California, certainly, and Colorado. And we have separate but related issues for the Mexican wolf in Arizona and New Mexico. In the last 20 years alone, we've had more than 24 changes in the status of a DPS, the lower 48 population writ large, or some combination thereof. And it's always a result of a petition, a delisting, an uplisting, a court decision that overturns part or some, in part or in whole, a listing decision. And so really what you've seen is that for a lot of these populations, we've turned to Congress to fix it. And generally, I don't think that it's a good idea for Congress to be making species, ecological decisions like that. But what we saw was a successful effort by members from Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming a number of years ago to legislatively delist the populations in those three states, that Northern Rocky Mountain DPS. Now, certainly it's been challenged over time, and certainly we're seeing some efforts to undo that legislative directive. But the reason that decision is durable is because Congress finally said, we direct Fish and Wildlife Service to promulgate this rule. And in order to be compliant with congressional intent, the Fish and Wildlife Service had to do so. Now, we would love to not have to do that for the Great Lakes, would love to not have to do that for all of the other populations, but here we are. And so there are a number of bills where we think that it is time for Congress, and certainly well past time for Congress, to provide that same direction for all of the other populations, for the populations across the lower 48, because we need time. It is well past time, and we need the opportunity for states to be able to manage these kind of conflicts. Now, certainly, it's not going to fix everything for ranchers like Rick, who have a very complicated state situation. It's not going to fix the states where we have listings of species on their state Endangered Species Act, their own state pieces of statute, right? But it is going to help provide some leverage and some additional tools for landowners who right now have very little recourse in many areas because of these conflicting statuses. It is time for Congress to provide some certainty to people who are truly risking their lives, their livelihoods, and their safety in many of these cases where you have large federally protected predators that have very few management tools.
And maybe expanding to there, Kaitlynn, on that complexity of that combined state and federal level management of endangered species, because obviously that is going to be different in states like Montana and Wyoming and Idaho, and grizzly bears coming to mind too, because that's our focus, is to get that continental grizzly bear and Yellowstone grizzly bear populations delisted. They are recovered. We know that. But Colorado, California, it's a different voting population and elected officials there. How do we break through that to give producers like Rick more tools and opportunities to be compensated, to have management of those wolves, not just let them run free and do what they want. Talk us through those challenges. And again, that sounds my question is way more simple than, or it's way more complex than a simple question. I understand that, but what are some ways that we can help equip those producers dealing with both Fed and state regulations potentially?
Well, I think this is what is so special about the NCBA and PLC systems, right? How we are set up and what our identity is. Because at the national level, we need to be able to provide certainty for our states through the federal listing or delisting process, right? We have legislation, we have litigation, and we have regulation, right? At the state level, we have really strong partners who are equipped to navigate some of those same very complex processes at the state level, to be able to build the kind of partnerships that we've built at the federal level with law enforcement officers, with wildlife interests, with hunters, with sportsmen, with people who are in education, people who have that community-centered interest, to be able to demonstrate that this is not just a rancher problem. This is not just a livestock or wildlife problem. This is something where if ecosystem management falls out of balance, as it has, as Rick so aptly described, the wolves are going to eat something, and if the cows are gone, well, your pets are probably next, right? And helping our states to build those coalitions, helping them to navigate some of the things that we're also navigating at the federal level is one of the values of our partnerships here. The strategy has to be different, right? So in California, you have a very complex California Endangered Species Act and a legislature that needs to have the kind of buy-in and the same sort of discussions that, for example, the Oregon legislature had several years ago when they delisted the wolves at the state level. How do we help our folks leverage the successes like we saw in Oregon to other places as well, like California and Washington that have state challenges too. Colorado is a different beast entirely because of the reintroduction that was done by ballot initiative, and a very different relationship between the cattle industry, the sheep industry, livestock generally, and some of their local political officials. Colorado, in fact, is probably in a better position, candidly, having the federal tools under the 10J rule that they have, than some other places where we see an endangered or threatened population. So we navigate those challenges incredibly carefully. We help our affiliates navigate both those coalition challenges and those legal challenges, and give them all the resources that we can, because their voices are so incredibly powerful at the state level.
Now, Rick, with all that in mind too, it's easy enough to go to the state capitol or go to Washington, D.C. and just share your frustrations and your firsthand experiences. But so many people also want to see data. They want to see maybe collaborations that ranchers like yourself or others are collaborating with folks on maybe the federal or state agencies when it comes to wildlife management and resource management. How are you balancing your conservation goals with the practical needs of running a ranch with an apex predator that is inhibiting you from going to some of your summer pasture as well? How important is it for you to balance this, but also have some research and some resources along the way?
Well, Sierra Valley, where we live, has been a hot spot because we had a pack of wolves that were just terrorizing. They've pretty much become addicted to cattle here. So the feds finally did take out this one pack. It was a big deal. It took a lot of work to get there. Not something they say they'll ever do again in the state, but we'll see what the feds say about that. Other ranchers in the state have been dealing with the same thing. The difference between Sierra Valley is we're kind of a wide open valley. We see the wolves, we find the carcasses, so we know. But when cattle start coming out of the hills like they are right now, and they're 10 to 15% of their loss calf crop, it's just going to be unsustainable for our people. I think the high market has helped keep people a little afloat, but we're not getting any help from our state because they're so in bed with environmentalists and wolf groups that they're just not going to be able to help us very much. Some people are trying, but it's all for the wolf to recover. Our wolf is halfway down the state now, or the wolf we have isn't the wolf that was here. And California cattlemen sued over that when they first came in, saying this isn't the species of wolf that was here. And they said pretty much we don't care in the courts. So we're fighting a bigger wolf than the one was here. We never had wolves in our area, like ever, but we do now. So we don't know where we're going to go. We're going to keep fighting. We hope the feds are going to help us, but we don't know how long that can last. So it's just going to be a constant fight. And unfortunately, the one thing that's probably going to happen, and the reason that they took out this pack of wolves wasn't because they were eating cattle in the state. It was back under the law, they could eat every cow in our valley and nothing happened. But the pressure put on them, they used human safety issue. When these wolves start going through the communities like our mountain lions are right now, because we have no deer population left. The deer population we have left in our small towns, you don't see until you get into towns. We have mountain lions every week walking down Main Street because that's where the deer are left. When that starts happening, the fear is that that's going to happen with the wolves because they've already done that. Someone's going to get hurt. And so that's why these wolves were taken out. But we shouldn't have to wait till someone gets killed before we do something. And there's great anger whenever I say that from the other side, saying that the wolves have never attacked anybody. Well, that's not true. There's issues around the world and other places they have. So it's going to be a fight that we don't know. We're very alarmed. It reminds us so much of the spotted owl issue when it hit our state and what it did, and the after effects of that with our wildfires. Half of our county has burned. So yeah, that didn't help the deer population either. But it was because of regulations that were not good management decisions that happened. And we see the same thing happening with the wolf. How we're going to respond. People moving out early of their feed, people not using their pastures. It's going to change the way we do business, and it'll change our economy just like the spotted owl did if we don't get a handle on it really soon.
And Kaitlynn, going off of that, what is it like sitting down with agency officials and elected officials that maybe are on the opposite side of this conversation, and they say that ESA reform does undermine conservation efforts? It seems pretty clear that other species and environments are negatively impacted by mismanagement or lack thereof management.
You know, it's really funny, it's a bit ironic, I think, because it's really never the agency itself or any of the federal or state officials who oppose changes to the Endangered Species Act. They see from the inside that it has inefficiencies, that it needs to keep pace, that it needs to be brought into the 2000s rather than stuck in the processes of the 1970s. We see this play out through the last several administrations. I mean, just from the Obama administration on, we've had a pendulum swing. Regulations around habitat, critical habitat, the 4D rule, giving some flexibility and authorities, and even in interagency consultation. We've seen those same sections changed by the Obama administration, and then the first Trump administration, and the Biden administration, and now the Trump administration again. I think there's universal agreement that the law needs to be changed. I think where you start seeing some concern is that regulations can be changed. We see that through the pendulum. Congressional changes are much more permanent, and Congress has sort of been standing behind the line of dipping their toes into truly passing a bill, because they know that if they make changes to the Endangered Species Act, it's much more durable and much more predictable, much more concrete, right, than if the agency does it through regulation. There are people who don't want to change the Endangered Species Act because they fear that it will weaken the act itself. I argue that the act is weak because if we can't successfully recover and complete the full process envisioned and laid out in the ESA, it is weak and it needs improvements. And this is why we keep making these efforts to reform the act itself. And I'm confident that when we look at the funding, we look at the ecological reality, and we look to our partners to say there are changes that we need to make. I'm confident. I know it's a compelling argument. It simply is, as Rick said, a math problem. Do we have enough votes? And I think if there ever were a time that we would have enough votes, I'm hopeful that this 119th Congress is it.
And when we look at that, when we say modern, when we say reform, Kaitlynn, what does it look like when we take emotion out? Both sides. It's an emotional topic on both sides. How important is the science-based approach in a modern ESA?
The science-based approach is crucial. We have so much science, we have so much data, we have so much technology to feed into ecosystem management and all of the different factors that affect utilization of the landscape, the modeling, the predictive technology that we can use, that of course has to be verified by on the ground realities. Something might look like habitat, for example, but if the species doesn't live there for some reason, then it's not actually habitat. It's just eligible landscape, right? The science-based approach is crucial because not only is it baked into the law itself, there's an expectation of a high degree of scientific quality, but it's also important because all of the associated decisions that we make on the landscape are based in science. As producers, Rick and his family are making 1,000 decisions a day that are all based in science. They're all based in biology and in agroecology. And in order to be able to have a functioning ecosystem, the science has to work all together.
And Rick, you mentioned a month and a half ago you were out in Washington, D.C. When you're speaking directly with these lawmakers or decision makers about ESA reform, what do you tell them, and why do you share that experience on behalf of California producers and producers across the nation impacted by the ESA?
Well, I think we just tell our story. I mean, we're not politicians to say we know they're under a great deal of pressure on all sides, but we hope common sense will prevail a little bit. And yeah, we understand the science, but it seems to always be used by those who have the loudest microphone or the ear of the person that's, wielding the laws into the land. And right now, that's not the cattle producers. So we're going to lean on a lot of people that are after going to stick their neck out for us in ways maybe they haven't before. But again, we talk about science, but it's clear to anybody's eyes what's going on in California that it's not working. Our deer herd's gone. Protecting one species is going to drive people off their ranches and out of our communities, and they may never be the same. So we need to get something done right away, and that's the message we've been trying to share with people. And we find out that people just don't know what's going on. Even our local people, once they find out what's going on, they somewhat change their tune. They believe we should have the right to protect our private property like they want. And so much of it is, well, that's great, but not in my backyard. Well, when wolves do move into parks and areas where they aren't now, it's going to be different. In California, when a lion gets into town, they remove it, but not when it gets into small towns in our rural areas. So things need to change. It's very hypocritical, and most people just don't understand. And I think our politicians just know that it's a battle they can't win right now. Here, I hope nationally we can. We're going to do our part to try and change things a little bit, but it's just very puzzling to the rancher, knowing that we're doing a good job and that most of the wildlife is living on our private lands, not on state land or government land. We had one biologist we were meeting with, and she got almost upset when we said all the wildlife is on private land. She said, we've been trying so hard to get them on our state land, but they just won't go. And well, that's a management issue if that's the case. So we've got a long ways to go, but we're not giving up yet.
Well, and I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up there, Rick. We're not giving up yet. A lot of work going on in Washington, D.C., a lot of work going on in Sacramento with the California Cattlemen's Association as well. And I want to thank you both for taking time here today out of your schedules, whether it's out on the ranch, and good thing you're getting some rain today, Rick, and
Yep.
also out in D.C. Any last thoughts before I let you get back to your days, Kaitlynn?
I think one of the really crucial things about any land management or resource management policy is exactly what Rick said in the beginning of this discussion. The policy has to work for the species itself, but it also has to work for the people that live around that species and the rest of the environment. When we think about a modernized ESA, when we think about a durable delisting status for the wolf or for any other species, it has to take into account those socioeconomic factors. Can the community support that level of wolves? Can the ecology support that level of wolves? The wildlife, the ranchers, and all of those things. So as we look to a modernized or an improved or simply a functional ESA, we have a lot of work to do here in DC. And all of that work starts right there at home at the state level with all of our members, many of whom who've been dealing with this for a long time and are experts in knowing what the next step should look like.
Rick, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think we need to know in the livestock industry that we're not alone. Sometimes we feel that way, and sometimes we create that, we want that independent type, resilient attitude, and that works well for us in most ways. But when it comes to this, we're all going to have to find the friends that are going to help us, and they're out there. We've found some in our federal Department of Wildlife, and those are the people we're going to have to rally behind. Those out there yelling that we think are so loud is a small group. They're the ones controlling things. It's time that we as cattlemen and agriculture in general start standing up and doing some screaming ourselves. So it's not the end of the world. We're going to get through this somehow. Other states have and other countries have. So, but we want to get done, and we want something permanent. So then when it's done, we can relax a little bit and do what we do best. And raising food and fiber for our country is very important. And I hope it gets stronger instead of weaker in the days to come.
Well, again, I want to thank you both for joining us here today. A very important issue to so many producers nationwide, not just on the gray wolf, but so many other species that could be classified as recovered, and they just simply are not. Again, we'll continue to track important conversations like this and everything impacting cattlemen and women out in the countryside. Thank you both for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lane.
With that, friends, thanks for taking the time to join us here on the Cattlemen's Call podcast. If you have not done so, make sure and subscribe today wherever you listen to podcasts. That will conclude today's conversation. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to NCBA's Cattlemen's Call podcast with Lane Nordlund. For more information, visit ncba.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.